Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, the Dodgers split a doubleheader. We'll talk about those games. We'll get into the offense, and then we will remember Maury Wills. So that's what's on tap. So make sure to keep it Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one local sports daily podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. This is a daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Make it easy on yourself and subscribe in those places, and you'll never miss a day because you know we're not going to. If this is your first time listening or watching, I'm Samperio, usually here with the co-host, Jeff Snider, but we're rolling solo, or I'm rolling solo today. The Dodgers have clinched, so Jeff and I have been enjoying some off days before we get ready for the gauntlet that is October. So that's what's there. And but we're still here talking Dodgers every weekday morning for you. And today we got one talking about a doubleheader. Dodgers split the doubleheader, talking about some offense and some guys that maybe we need to look out for or who's earning their way into the starting lineup. And then we remember Maury Wills, who passed at the age of 89 and who was a Dodger legend in every sense of the word. So that's what we're going to get into today. So let's start with the doubleheader. The Dodgers split game. They won game one, lost game two. And realistically, other than one big inning, they were very close to losing both games of the doubleheader. The Dodgers were down 5-1 going into the bottom of the eighth. They ended up putting 5 runs in that bottom of the eighth to take 6-5 lead and ended up winning the game. And yeah, it was an interesting day just in terms of the Dodgers, and we talked about how they don't keep off the gas pedal or keep on the gas pedal, and how these guys are up handling things, and how the Dodgers are still winning games despite having almost everything clinched. And the game one was an example of that. They were down the entire game for the most part. Michael Grove got the start. He struggled, and also the defense struggled. They didn't help him out too much. He ended up giving up 5 runs, 3 of them earned, and then he gave way to Ryan Pepio. The plan was for those two to at least combine to pitch the entire game. That was the big time goal, and it would have happened more than likely had the Dodgers not come back and taken that lead. Chris Martin ended up pitching the ninth inning, and the Dodgers ended up getting the win. But for Grove, it's been a similar thing for Grove the entire season. He's looked good, but he's also found some trouble here and there. And for him, at least a few times, some of that trouble has come with some lack of help defensively. But it's also just a matter of him giving up some hard contact. But for, the Dodgers, he wasn't someone that was like a highly touted prospect when he was drafted. He wasn't somebody that was expected. And he's shown to be pretty solid at the very least, at least he can be at least a number 5 starter for this team and maybe even a little bit higher for some other teams, especially if he given the chance to continue to grow. Not sure if he'll have that chance with the Dodgers just because realistically they'll have 4 or 5 guys that are probably better than him for the most part. But he's good. He's been good at the role that he's been asked to fill this year, especially getting thrust into the major leagues earlier this season when probably he wasn't expecting to either. So yeah, overall good on Grove. Pepio came in and shut the door and didn't give up any runs and kept the Dodgers in the game, and ultimately was rewarded with the win because the Dodgers ended up putting up those runs in the 8th inning. And the big part of that 8th inning was the runs were, and we've talked about this a few times before, the runs, it wasn't just home runs. The Dodgers ended up putting up 5 runs, but Austin Barnes hit a home run, but I believe that was the only home run for that inning. And it's a matter of just taking advantage. The other part is that Josh Rojas over at third base didn't play the cleanest inning, and it ultimately ended up benefiting the Dodgers as they ended up putting up the 5 runs. And it was good. It was fun to watch. It was one of those games where the Dodgers were what is it, snatching the jaws of victory from defeat type of deal, where had you been watching and just based on the nature of, okay, the Dodgers are clinched, so these games don't matter as much per se, it might have been one that you turned off or turned away or didn't pay full attention to, and then all of a sudden you look up and the Dodgers have tied the game and then take the lead. So it was good in that sense of them battling and showing that they continue to fight. And Dave Roberts showed that fight as well, as he pinch hit Will Smith and Mookie Betts in that 8th inning, trying to take the lead and take advantage and get those guys. I'm sure it also presents situations in the case that somehow Mookie Betts or Will Smith don't start in the playoffs, which I hopefully doesn't happen. That's a situation to kind of put them in, big pinch hit spot, needing a base hit, trying to either tie the game, get into the game, whatever the case is. So, you can take everything as that type of learning experience. And then in game 2, Tyler Anderson, not as sharp. Again, defense didn't help him out as much either. The Dodgers ended up putting up too much runs on the offensive side. But at this point, they won that first game. It's a doubleheader. Um, you can understand that the offense might not be able to get it rolling. The Diamondbacks pitcher, forget his name, but he shut him down last week. He shut him down this week again, and props to him. Max Muncy did hit a 2-run home run, which is always good to see. Max Muncy continuing to show that power and be good. So that's what the main recap from the first game was. Phil Bickford, who Jeff talked about as being maybe good again, did give up a home run to Ketel Marte, but he did pitch 2 innings. Realistically, we don't know what we're going to get out of Bickford in terms of, is he going to be on the October roster or not. But it wasn't a terrible pitch, but it was a fastball low in the zone that Marte went in and hit. So he's still been pitching pretty well overall, but that is one thing that Bickford comes with, is he is susceptible to giving up the home runs. So Blake Trinan is supposed to return Thursday if all goes well, which means that he will, push everybody back a little bit. And one of those guys that gets pushed back in that sense is Phil Bickford. So we'll continue to monitor this bullpen situation. And these guys are basically auditioning to a certain extent, night in and night out. And you got to play your best to make it onto October. So that's where we're at. We're going to talk about the Dodgers offense. We're going to talk about a couple guys that we've had some eyes on, and maybe a guy that we need to put an eye on. But first, let's talk about Blue Chew. Summer's winding down. The nights are getting longer, but the breeze isn't the only thing that's getting stiff. That's right. This episode is sponsored by Blue Chew. Guys, we all know that confidence can take you far in life. That's especially true in the bedroom, especially when it's time to step up in the plate. And that's where Blue Chew comes in. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in chewable tablets and at the fraction of the cost. You can take them anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. And it's an easy process. You go to bluechew.com, you consult one of their licensed medical providers. Once you're approved, you receive your prescription within days. The best part, it's all done online. No visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. And Blue Chew's tablets are made right here in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. So if you could benefit from some extra confidence when it's time to perform, chew it and do it. Get ready for October. Not all the Dodgers are getting ready for October, but you can get ready for October too. And right now we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code LOCKEDON at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's bluechew.com, promo code LOCKEDON to receive your first month free. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring this podcast. Okay, so the Dodgers offense, we know the main guys of it. Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, Trey Turner, and Will Smith are going to occupy the first 4 spots in the Dodgers lineup. We know that, we know Justin Turner is going to probably be in that 5th spot. We know Max Muncy will be in there. So we have those 6 names. That leaves us to 3 spots. Well, maybe some people believe 2 spots, but it might be opening up to 3 spots. You got second base, you got center field, you got left field. And when we've talked before, we've mainly talked about center and left field being open, but Gavin Lux, who recently, had some neck stiffness, neck injury, and missed some time, but you go back and look, and Gavin Lux has struggled a little bit, just a little bit over the last month or so, or maybe less than a month, but it's a matter of, back to back 0 for 4s yesterday. Um, but he did have three hits the night before. So it's just a matter of how you feel it. But last 7 games, 27 at bats, he's hitting 222 with a 222 slugging percentage. You go back to the last 15 games, it bumps up to 241 with the 352 slugging percentage. So it might not be one where, oh, Gavin Lux is not going to be the starter in October, but it's a matter of just something to keep an eye on. Overall, I still expect him to be the Dodgers starting second baseman once we get to the playoffs, and I don't see there being a reason for that not to be the case. But just something to monitor because Max Muncy can play second base, and if the other guys get hot, Joey Gallo, Cody Bellinger, Chris Taylor, if two of those guys get hot, then the Dodgers may have a conversation about how they want to handle things if Flux doesn't pick it back up. But realistically, he's still hitting better than the other three guys I mentioned. So now we go into those other three guys we mentioned, and it's a mixed bag in terms of they're not playing amazingly, but they've all had situations and games in the last few weeks where they've been a big benefit to the Dodgers and helped them win games. But you look at the overall numbers, Chris Taylor over the last 30 games, he's still hitting just 190 with the, slashing right under 600. So, or right over 600. But, he has picked up, he's hit a few home runs in recent weeks. He's cut his strikeouts down a little bit, not really. Actually, yeah, not really. But he has picked up more hits than he was before. And, Chris Taylor's a guy who is one of those where, him and Cody Bellinger are in a similar boat where we've seen them be not as great in the regular season and then come through in the postseason or catch a hot streak or whatever the case is. Chris Taylor is one of those guys that's really big on that. He hasn't really had that hot streak this year, so it kind of you think about, is he gonna have that hot streak, or is it is he just, this is him this season? And that's the hardest part for the Dodgers, is kind of figuring out, okay, is he going to be a guy that catches fire and we can stick into our lineup? Or is he going to be a guy that, swings and misses and strikes out 2-3 times a game? That all remains to be seen, but I would imagine that the Dodgers are going to continue to give him chances to kind of figure things out. Um, and then we move on to Cody Bellinger, who hasn't really figured things out at all. He's hitting over his last 15 games, hitting 163 with OPS under 500. Not ideal. He has only hit 2 home runs in the last month. He just, he has cut down his strikeouts recently, but he's not really hitting the ball that hard or putting it, he's not all of a sudden a world beater at the plate, other than cutting the strikeouts down a little bit. And it's a matter of, is the defense going to be enough to sustain him? Because realistically, between Chris Taylor and Joey Gallo, Cody Bellinger has been the worst hitter. And like we've mentioned before, those guys, Chris Taylor plays a strong enough center field to push Cody Bellinger out, and the Dodgers wouldn't miss too much. Joey Gallo, I don't know if he can play a strong enough center field to do that, but he can play a strong enough left field that leaves Chris Taylor playing a strong enough center field for Cody Bellinger to be left out of the lineup. So Dave Roberts said who performs is going to play. We also have Trace Thompson in that mix. He can definitely start in center field, and he's continued to be strong at the plate. So, at this point, I think Cody Bellinger might be the odd man out, unless the Dodgers just prioritize that defense, leave him in the number 9 hole, and hope that he can do something. So that's where we're at. And then Joey Gallo, he's a guy. Depends what you want. If you want a guy that's going to hit 300, that's not Joey Gallo, but Joey Gallo's hitting under 200. When you go over his last 7 games, last 15 games, last 30 games, he's hovering around 180, 190. But his slugging is up there in the 4 or 500s. He's hitting home runs. He's hitting extra base hits. He's driving in runs. He's been able to help the Dodgers out in a few games providing some offense. And like I said, he's a guy who I wouldn't say he's a streaky hitter, but he's a guy that can do damage. When you have Cody Bellinger up right now, yeah, sorry, yeah, he can hit a home run, but realistically, he hasn't hit them at the clip that the Dodgers would like, to see, or that we would like to see. And since joining the Dodgers, Joey Gallo's at least hitting home runs at a decent clip to where you can have an expectation that he might hit the ball over the wall when he's at the plate. Where Cody Bellinger, you don't necessarily have that expectation yet. So it remains a matter of what you prioritize, what the Dodgers prioritize, and there's still a few weeks to figure it out, or there's still a few series to figure it out. Maybe not. Oh, sorry, maybe not a few weeks, but yeah, I think Cody Bellinger has to work his way into it. I still believe he's the odd man out. I think he needs to find a way to figure it out here the last few weeks and get into a starting lineup. Because if not, I see Chris Taylor, I see Clay Thompson starting in center field, and then I see the whoever's not starting in center starting in left, or with Joey Gallo starting in left. So that's what's there. That's what it is. And that's the fact of the matter is if Dave Roberts sticks to what he says and says the best players will play, or whoever's performing best will play, realistically, that's not Cody Bellinger, and it hasn't been the entire season, and it definitely really hasn't manifested it here in the last few weeks like we maybe thought it would. He's had a few good games here and there, but realistically, it just hasn't been sustained progress. And I don't know if the Dodgers want to roll with that going into October. So we will continue to monitor this as well, similar to the bullpen. And, I hope Cody Bellinger figures it out, but realistically, um, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So we'll have to hope that he does. And if not, at the very least, the good part is if he doesn't, the Dodgers have capable options behind him defensively with a little bit more help offensively. So it is what it is. We can't do anything about it. It's going to be all up to them. So that's going to do it for this part of the offense. We'll get into Maury Wills, who passed away at the age of 89, was a Dodger legend, and just kind of remember him as a player and then in his post-playing days. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day, and make sure to check out Locked On Dodgers wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. So we got the news on Tuesday that Maury Wills passed away at the age of 89. He, for those of you that maybe don't know Maury Wills, he was a really great player for the Dodgers coming up. He was the MVP. Before, he was a league leader in stolen bases a few times. He won a couple Gold Gloves at shortstop. He holds the Dodger record with 490 stolen bases, and he was the first player to steal over 100 bases in one season. In that 1962 season, he stole 104 bases. And Maury Wills has an interesting, story. He was in the Dodgers minor, or not just Dodger, but he was in the minor leagues for almost 9 years before he eventually came up and became the Dodgers shortstop. At that time, when he was in the minors, Pee Wee Reese was a shortstop for the Dodgers, so there wasn't necessarily room for him. And back then, they didn't move around guys as often, I would imagine, because if he was that talented, they probably would have found a spot for him. But despite that, he ended up playing for 14 years, 11 plus of those with the Dodgers, hit 281, had 586 career stolen bases, 490 with the Dodgers, and was a three-time World Series champion. And he's a guy, now we know him as Maury, who works with the guys that have speed, who works with guys on bunting, and who's been around, similar to Don Newcomb, similar to Tommy Lasorda, guys that stuck around and helped out and can be seen whether in spring training or at the games during the regular season. But make no mistake about it, Maury Wills was a really good player, and unfortunately hasn't been good enough to be considered fully or to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, which is something that he wanted. He didn't make it normally. He didn't make it with the Veterans Committee. Hasn't made it with the Golden Days era ballot. Not sure if he'll end up making it one day, but he did have an impact on the game. Like I said, first player to steal over 100 bases. He won an MVP over Willie Mays one year. three-time World Series champion. Was a stalwart for the Dodgers at shortstop, and a guy that was big for the Dodgers and just big for baseball in terms of getting stolen base into maybe a different realm and showing how strong it could be. When it comes to Maury in his post playing days, we like I mentioned, we've seen him. Maury's pit was kind of what it was called with him and teaching guys how to bunt. The Dodgers brought him on in 2001 when Jim Tracy had invited him out in order to teach that bunting. That's when Dave Roberts was around that time, and Dave, did say that this was a tough one for him. He says, "quote I know he passed peacefully, and I'm going to have a heavy heart. Maury was very impactful to me personally, professionally. He's going to be missed. This one is tough for me." And he also, reminded us that he does wear number 30 because of Wills. And yeah, I mean, in the sense of a guy who has speed, Dave Roberts was that guy. Maury Wills was they were drawn to each other because of that. They were drawn to each other because he was on the Dodgers, and then they're drawn to each other because Maury Wills thought that Dave Roberts could bump more. And they were telling the story during one of the broadcasts of how, I believe during one of the broadcasts or maybe one of the articles I've read so far about Wills, and how he used to come down and talk to Dave Roberts, and they'd say, "Hey, Maury wants to talk to you," and Maury would be like, "Hey, you need a bunt, or you need a bunt more," or whatever the case was. And bunt is a lost art form in these days, but Maury was still a guy that was trying to be out there and teach it. And realistically, it's just kind of been phased out. It wasn't as important and hasn't really been a thing. But speed is still there, and speed has been part of it. So yeah, we remember Maury Wills. We give a strong, thoughts and prayers to his family and everyone dealing with it, not just his immediate family, but his Dodger family. It's been, a rough couple years recently. We've lost Tommy Lasorda, we lost Vince Scully, now we lost Maury Wills, we lost Don Newcomb not that long ago. And, it's one of those where we're seeing these Dodger legends and, staples of the Dodgers organization, and it's tough to see, but we remember them and we think about them, and we know that it's we remember the good times and we think about that, and it's been fun. And that's what it is about Maury Wills. He's one of those, Dave Roberts, big impact. Obviously, he's had a big impact on a few guys. And we'll go out with the quote here with from Dave Roberts. He says, "quote Maury Wills once told me that there will be a point in my career when everyone in the ballpark will know that I have to steal a base, and I will steal that base. When I got out there, I knew that was what Maury Wills talking about." That's what he's talking about in the 2004 postseason when Dave Roberts was on the Red Sox, and the Red Sox came back down from a 3-0 series deficit to the Yankees. And if you know Dave Roberts or baseball, you know that he was used as a pinch runner in the ninth inning of one of those games. He ended up stealing second base. The Red Sox ended up winning on a walk-off right after that, and then ended up coming back and winning and becoming World Series champions for the first time in 86 years. So it was one of those things where, hey, everyone has different guys. Maury Wills was that guy for Dave Roberts, and it's it's beautiful to see. And I'm sure over the next few days or over the next couple of days, we're going to see a lot more of stories like that of Maury Wills and his impact on players and former players, current players, whatever the case was. Realistically, he hadn't been out there as often the last few years. Just a matter of his health, and the Dodgers, bunting, like I said, has kind of been phased out a little bit, not as important as it once was in the game of baseball. And but it didn't change the fact that he was still around, he was still helping out, and he was still a guy that a lot of people, it's instant respect when you see him. That's a former MVP. That's a guy who, at one point was one of the best to ever do it in terms of stolen bases, was the best to ever do it in general. He was an all-star game MVP. He has the resume to demand that respect. And, Dodger players, at the very least, in the Dodger organization, we know that these players treat that respect and handle that respect and do it well. We've seen a lot of guys over the years, talk about different guys that have helped them out, and Maury Wills was one of those guys. So I said respect, salute, and everything good toward the Wills family, toward the Dodger family, and thank you, Maury, for what you did as a Dodger and for being a legacy, and hopefully that legacy will continue on in Dodger blue. So that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Check out Locked On MLB for your second listen. Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Locked On MLB is the number one daily league-wide podcast and can be found wherever you find podcasts on YouTube and on the Odyssey app. You can find us in those places as well. YouTube, wherever you find podcasts, Odyssey app, Locked On Dodgers. You can also find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Dodgers. Jeff is on Twitter at Snydog. I'm at Vince Samperio. If you need to call and leave us a voicemail or send us a text, you can do so at 323-863-5625. Or you can send us an email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us. When you get in your car or if you're at home, tell your smart device play podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree, you just have to listen. Have a good one.